Hey friends, did you know that a Jewish authentic Torah scroll has 304,805 letters? And if only one letter is missing in the Torah, it becomes invalid. You can't use it. There's no extra letters, no extra verses, no extra chapters. Every letter is accounted for. You see, the Torah is divided in 54 portions, and every Shabbat we read a portion. Some are longer, some are shorter. This week we're going to read one of the final portions in the book of Exodus called Vayakhel, which together with the following portion of Pekudei make up for an unusually long Torah reading. Yet what's astonishing about this is that these two portions don't really document anything new. They simply reiterate the specifications of the building of the Mishkan, their tabernacle, its vessels, and the priestly vestments, precisely as it's recounted in Teruma, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, the portions we read for the last few weeks. You see, in the earlier portions, we as the Jewish people hear the command to build the Mishkan and the instructions how to build it. In this portion, we read how the Jewish people executed this project. The description as repeated here is so close to the description in the original command that Rashi, the great commentary, doesn't really offer any commentary on this segment, sufficing with a brief remark. I already explained the offering and the Mishkan and its work in the previous portions. No reason to explain again. So why doesn't the Torah simply tell us in one sentence, and we'll get the whole point? It should have said, the Jewish people did as God commanded them to do. Why the repetition of how they did it all? Now, my point isn't, God forbid, to complain about the length of the Torah, to sit through the reading of this portion and then next week's portion, 214 verses. And we know that the Torah generally writes things very minimalistic, very concise. Even very famous historical moments are not elaborated in the Torah at length. Take, for example, the 6 days of creation. The monumental 6 days are described in 31 verses. Take, for example, the 10 Commandments are only 13 verses. So how could it be that every instance of the Torah words that are so precise and used so sparingly, yet here the Torah splurges 213 verses and thousands of words for the purpose of retelling us what we already know? All the specs of the Mishkan without really giving us anything new? Doesn't the Torah use words sparingly? Well, friends, the Rebbe addressed this question on many occasions, approaching it from different angles at different times. So I share with you today a most enlightening, empowering resolution the Rebbe wrote in a letter 73 years ago on the 27th of Adar, 1951. Yes, these portions of Vayakhel and Pekudei, these two portions, repeat what appears in earlier portions without adding any new details. Yet that is precisely the point. The way God commanded to create the Mishkan, its vessels, and the vestments in these two portions of Teruma and Tetzaveh is exactly how the command was carried out in this week's portion, Vayakhel, and next week's Pekudei. But it was carried out to the letter. Zero discrepancy between the plan and the execution. You see, in life, we commonly find ourselves straddling worlds, straddling two worlds, the world of our dreams and the world we live in. In one's dream, he lives in a 10-bedroom mansion with a private beach. In reality, one lives in a 2-bedroom apartment underneath an insomniac neighbor and overlooking a noisy highway. He had plans for that dream house, but when he saw the prices on Zillow, he realized it's called a dream house for a reason. A real house, it sure ain't. Surely he let go of more and more of the dream and settled for something less and less in the reality. We're now in an election season. Politicians often zigzag in their positions. They quickly abandon their most loudly touted campaign promises as soon as they take office. Things look different from here, they explain. There's a fundamental gap between how things appear from the standpoint of theory and intention and how they appear on the ground. As someone once famously said, I was a great parent until I had kids. They tell the story of the fifth Chabad Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab was once shown a most beautiful painting, the painting of a field of wheat. It had a most pleasant ambiance. The sun was shining brightly, and a small bird stood on top of one of the wheat stalks. Many art experts were impressed by how brilliantly or realistically the scene had been captured by the artist. A simple farmer viewed the painting and commented, this painting indeed does look real, except the bird on the stalk. Although the bird is small, he said, the weight of the body should have bent the stalk. Yet, in the painting, the stalk of wheat stood as straight and tall as those surrounding it. The Rebbe drew a valuable insight from this story and related a most profound lesson. One's divine service can look beautiful and give the impression of being alive. However, if it lacks the ability to bend, it ceases to be real. This is how it is. In the imaginary field in the painter's mind, the stalk stands up proud and straight. But a real field aligns more closely with the vision of the simple farmer. And yes, one's divine service is only real if one can bend, which means submit themselves to God's will rather their own. But here in this week's portion, something remarkable happens. God's vision of this Mishkan is carried out as precisely as envisioned. There's no discrepancy between plan and execution. Every single component and detail described in the command is precisely accounted for here. Every beam, every socket, every pillar of the Mishkan, every tapestry and every hook, every flower and knob of the menorah, and so on and so forth. Crafted exactly as planned and set exactly in place, all the dreams came true. And friends, here the Torah teaches us something so profound. The Torah vision, the command, it's not a lofty ideal, an abstract utopia made for heaven, but unattainable here on earth. God forbid. Rather, God's vision can and does pass the test of our reality. God is the creator of the world, and he exists within our world. God knows our reality and our life better than we know ourselves. And if he says to do something in the Torah, it's going to happen. It's not like matching up the visions to the reality was very easy. I mean, remember, the Jewish people were just slaves in Egypt. I mean, who among them was a professional weaver or a smith or a spice maker or a jeweler to build a Mishkan? They were stuck in the middle of the desert thousands of years ago. There was no Home Depot or a YouTube do-it-yourself video. Yet they managed to carry out the plan to the letter. How, you may ask? Because they were commanded by God, and whenever God issues an order, he simultaneously provides the energy and the resources to obey and fulfill them. They say, God looks into the Torah and creates the world. What does that mean? That the Torah is the world's blueprint, the divine programming language by which all of existence is realized. To internalize this means to understand the following profound truth. God's commandments are not an outer world dream, but quite the opposite. They are the creative force and the DNA of the world itself. Therefore, no gap can exist between God's dream for us and our ability to make it real. You know, we often hear about people talking about reinforcing their commitment to Torah and mitzvot, or either to observe the Shabbat, family purity, kosher, put up a mezuzah, or setting time for Torah study, or giving large sums of charity. Sometimes we think, that's such a nice speech. But you know what? This doesn't fit into my world. It doesn't fit into my reality. It doesn't fit into my social circles, my financial status, or my family, or my psychological circumstances. It's just not happening to me. I just got too much on my plate to live life that way now. Well, to unburden us of this unfortunate mindset, the Torah devotes hundreds of verses, over 200 verses telling us that the Mishkan was built exactly as planned to teach us that the real world we live in and the visionary world of the Torah are one. And ultimately, there's no gap between God's vision for us and the life we live. And when we recognize this, two things are going to happen. Number one, we will realize that we are capable of far more than we thought. And number two, that niggling cognitive dissonance between who I want to be and who I think I am simply disappears. There was actually a very pious man, Rebbe Alter. He once asked the Rebbe in a private audience in a Yechidus. And he asked, Rebbe, how is it possible to deal with so many pressing responsibilities to God, to his family, to his job, to his community? And the Rebbe explained that the key is to decide that you can do it. The very act of firmly defining oneself as having the ability to do whatever God wants gives the person the strength to succeed. A distant cousin of mine, by the name of Rabbi Eliyahu Friedman, he lives in Safed in Sfat, Israel, and he once visited Antwerp, Belgium, to go and meet a great philanthropist, Reb Asher, to raise funds for the yeshiva in Sfat. When Reb Asher heard that Rabbi Friedman represented a Chabad institution he's raising funds for it for the yeshiva boys to study, he said, let me tell you a story. He said, I'm a businessman, and I once learned about an auction of merchandise taking place in Switzerland. I live in Belgium, wasn't too far, yet I was unsure if I should buy and bid at this auction. So I decided to ask the Rebbe for his advice. He was a wise man. I consulted with him, and he advised me to estimate the amount that I expect to earn from this transaction and set aside 20% of that amount for charity. And then the Rebbe said, I should go ahead and buy the merchandise, and with God's help, I will realize a great profit. Well, he says, that's what I did. I set aside a very large sum for tzedakah, charity. I went to the auction, and I bought the lot. Now, my plan, he says, was to wait for the value to rise and then sell. But he said, meanwhile, I took my family on a vacation, and now when I came back, the price didn't change, stayed the same. He said, time passed. And to my great disappointment, the market steadily plummeted. And by this time, I was thinking, forget about a profit. I just want to cut my losses. I'm a businessman. I'm a practical person by nature. So I wrote another letter to the Rebbe, and I described the development, complaining that, hey, the promise didn't pan out the way you said it's going to be. A few days later, I received a response from the Rebbe's office, and it said as follows. The Torah promises aser bishvil shetisasher, tithe so that you may become wealthy. Surely this guarantee will be fulfilled. Don't worry about the price drop. Be patient. So I held on to the goods, he says, and eventually the price rose far higher than I ever expected, bringing in a massive profit. And I was able to give the charity. Rabbi Asher concluded, the fact that the price of goods went up, it's not really a miracle, because markets rise and markets fall. You know what is the miracle? The miracle is that the Rebbe's absolute certainty that one doesn't lose by giving tzedakah, and the firmness of the declaration that the Torah's words must come true. One more key point I want to share with you. The miraculous ability to carry out the Mishkan, to build the Mishkan to perfection, didn't happen by itself. God endowed the Jews with such miraculous ability only after the Jewish people performed a small miracle on their own. What am I talking about? The Jews got this new project. Now, they didn't make a survey or make a board meeting, commission a study, form a think tank to say, is it feasible to build a Mishkan here in the desert, and decide whether this project maybe even doesn't even make sense to build in the Mishkan. Yet what did they do? As soon as they were commanded, they jumped right into it with just everything they had. They donated their time, their talent, their material. They were so dedicated that Moses had to say, hey guys, stop, we have enough. They gave too much. Only after they did their part, which we would call the small miracle, the miracle of overcoming natural hesitance and self-doubt, did God intervene, and he endowed them with the miraculous ability to see it through the end. You see, friends, God performs miracles for those who perform small miracles for themselves. You might remember the story in the beginning of the book of Exodus. You remember when Moses was born, he was put into a basket in the Nile? And then it says Pharaoh's daughter, her name was Batya. She was walking along the Nile riverbank and she heard the voice of a child crying from the river. And it says, Vayishlach et amasa. And what does it mean? She stretched forth her hand to reach the basket of the baby. But the verse doesn't use the word she stretched forth her hand. It doesn't say yada. It says amasa, which means she stretched her hand a cubit. And the sages derived, what does it mean? A cubit is a few feet in length. A miracle happened. She was far from the baby's basket. God extended her hand to reach the basket from the Nile and pull Moses to safety. Hey, the question's asked, if the basket was far away, that her hand had to extend a few feet to reach the basket, why did she even bother to reach out in the first place? Didn't she see she's too far? She wasn't in reach? Yet the answer is, our sages are teaching us how miracles happen, friends. The basket was too far away. But when Batya heard the voice of a child crying, she didn't think twice. Instinctively, she reached out to help, no matter how out of reach or improbable the likelihood of success. And once she demonstrated her unquestioning commitment to help, God responded in kind. And he miraculously extended her arm so that she can finish what she started. And in the end, Batya was able to save Moses from the water, who later took the Jews out of Egypt and brought the Torah to the world as we have it today. Friends, I would like to end with the following story that was shared by the Rebbe at a gathering before Passover in 1985. And this story is published in a book by Professor Velvel Green. The name of the book is Curiosity and the Desire for Truth. The story takes place in 1962 when a young and energetic Chabad shliach named Rabbi Moshe Feller arrived in Minnesota as the Rebbe's representative. And he was met with a great deal of indifference and even disdain from the old-fashioned style of Judaism. Looking to make inroads in this very liberal academic type community, he was directed to a man named Dr. Velvel Green. He was a pillar of the local jury. And if Rabbi Feller thought, if I make a good impression, maybe this Dr. Green can introduce me to other people and open doors for me. Dr. Green was a famous doctor. He was actually an expert in environmental microbiology. He began working in NASA in their division called the Planetary Quarantine Division in an astrobiology program, and they were looking for life on Mars. So getting in touch with Dr. Green wasn't easy. But Rabbi Feller made his acquaintance by phone. There was no Google, no directories. He just, the old-fashioned way, opening up a phone book. And he reached Dr. Green and he said, "Can I come meet you?" He says, "Sure, come to my office." Now their meeting began late in the afternoon and was really hostile from the start. Dr. Green said, "Hey, Rabbi Feller, look at you. You're dressed like an undertaker. You're wearing a dark suit, a white shirt. If you want to succeed here in Minnesota," he said, "you need to consider wearing something more modern, Rabbi. You got to start trimming your beard." Now, meanwhile, the sun is starting to set. And Rabbi Feller realized he didn't do the afternoon service mincha. He interrupted the meeting. He said, "Dr. Green, hold on a minute." Goes to the corner and he prays the afternoon service. Oh, this was too much for Dr. Green. He goes, "Hey, Rabbi, I agreed to meet you in my office. This is a high security facility of the United States government. And now you're turning my office into a synagogue? Now I'm supposed to wait for you to finish your mumbling and you're swaying back and forth and you're praying?" Rabbi Feller finished. He apologized. He says, "Look, you know how important this meeting is to me. But what I had to do now was even more important." At this point, Professor Green was insulted. And the meeting ended without the two even shaking hands. A few weeks passed, and Dr. Green and his wife were reading a book. They were part of a Jewish book club. And they were reading about the history of the terrible Cossack pogroms that took place in Russia. The Chelmenitskys, they murdered in the year 1648, about 1 million Jews who heroically gave up their life rather than giving up their religion. And the couple said, "This type of stuff, Jews living like that, is the past. In America today, all anyone cares about is money. Jews won't even risk $1 for their beliefs in God." And suddenly, It struck Dr. Green. Hey, just a few weeks ago, for the first time in my life, I met a Jew just like the one you just read about in history. Someone who's connected to something higher than the shallow person. He said to his wife, I just met a rabbi like that. In the middle of a meeting in my office, he stood up to pray, not caring at the least what I might think about it. And friend, this began a deep and lasting friendship between Rabbi Feller and Dr. Green, who eventually became a Chabad Chassid and one of the foremost voices for the compatibility between Torah and science. My dear friends, I ask you, please take this powerful message to heart, that the real world we live in and the visionary world of God and the Torah are ultimately there for you and I. What does that mean? There is no gap between God's vision for me and the life I live, and no gap for you and the life you live. Do your part with your heart and soul. Overcome your natural hesitance, your self-doubt. And when you do your small part and perform your own small miracles, then God will intervene and bestow his bountiful blessings upon you and ensure that you make it through to the end. As they say, God performs miracles for those who perform small miracles for themselves. Go ahead and do it. Shalom.